Hi, you're with BloombergQuint and I'm Tamanna. Prime Minister Modi will be meeting President Trump for the first time on the 26th of June. And while a lot is being written and said about what can be expected from this meet, of course it's not an official state visit, there is curiosity also about what the meeting will look like and how it will go forward, seeing that both Prime Minister Modi and President Trump are big personalities. We are joined today by Neelam Deo. She is former ambassador as well as director at Gateway House. And Neelam Deo, thank you so much for joining us. One key question is, how should India and Prime Minister Modi deal with someone like President Trump, who has been known to be a little inconsistent and unpredictable in his very few months in office so far?
You know, President Trump is the ultimate unknown, and there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding what are his positions, what are his views, because he does change them often as well. But I would say Prime Minister Modi is going to Washington, 3 years under his belt. He's won a lot of elections, and most importantly, the recent election in Uttar Pradesh, his popularity ratings in India are very high. He's now a recognized global leader. So I think he will go with the kind of confidence that comes with being so politically stable.
That's an interesting point you make, because in contrast, President Trump is currently under investigation, his close aides are under investigation, and he is having a turbulent time. Do you think that will affect the dynamics? Because when Prime Minister Modi met former President Barack Obama, a lot was being talked about their personal chemistry.
Well, that was actually surprising that Prime Minister Modi was able to build such a good personal rapport with Obama, who's a completely different personality type, much more cerebral, much more withdrawn. I would imagine that he will have a good rapport with President Trump. Trump and his administration are certainly under investigation. I think the kind of instability that is shown by his early months is not unusual in the American system. They take a while to settle down. Some of the appointments that they choose to make get rejected by the Senate confirmation process. So I wouldn't read too much into that, but there is a contrast between all the kind of discussions going on in the United States around President Trump and the full prestige that Prime Minister Modi seems to enjoy here.
Let's talk a bit more about the two leaders. Very strong leaders who speak to their domestic audiences with, I would say, a similarity in one motto. There's America first on President Trump's side and Prime Minister Modi pushing for Make in India. Now, where do those two meet when you're talking about some sort of an exchange between the two nations?
You know, I feel that both those slogans which the two politicians have adopted actually don't mean too much. Neither America nor India have very vibrant manufacturing sectors. So they certainly understand, both of them, the need to have more manufacturing take place, because that is where employment will be generated. Will they clash? I don't think so. The American economy is much more industrialized, much more sophisticated. What we are trying to make is at a different level altogether. So I think that they can actually be complementary. If American companies come and invest in India, they will not be investing in products that are also made in the United States, like aircraft, like high-tech weapons. Here in India, we are still talking about making automobiles. We are still talking about making a lower level of sophistication.
They want to shift automobile production back to the United States, and we've seen that with a lot of companies as well. GM, for example, and Ford, for example, being forced to push back some of their production to America.
They have, but not because of the desire, I would say, of their presidents. I think it has more to do with technology, with the fact that the new with artificial intelligence, with 3D manufacturing, etc., it has become viable to build and manufacture nearer your market, then you don't have to spend the time or the cost of transport from China, from India. So that is why those companies are moving some manufacturing back to the United States.
Okay, let's talk a bit about what the sticking points could be. We know the new immigration rules, H-1B visas, and climate change are areas where the Trump administration has specifically talked about India, not in immigration, but at least H-1B visas and climate change. Do you think the Prime Minister would bring up these issues on the first meeting?
I hope he won't bring up H-1B visas, an issue that we've been discussing with the American administration for the last 25 years. Our IT sector, which would be the most affected by drastic changes in H-1B visa regulations, claims that it has adapted, it has already accounted for the possibility of these changes. So Wipro has talked about hiring 10,000 people in the United States. The CEO of Infosys says that their value-added products now don't necessitate the numbers of people that they used to move earlier. And the actual change that is being talked about, raising the salary cap for getting an H-1B visa, actually is already being implemented by Australia, for example.
So
other countries are talking about it.
It's not worth squandering diplomatic goodwill on H-1B visas?
I think it's both. You shouldn't squander goodwill, and your industry is saying they don't need it. So why would you take up an issue which can be an irritant, and actually has been an irritant for the last 2 decades? Climate change is a totally different issue, where the President of the United States has pulled his country out of the Paris process, which was actually a voluntary process. Those are commitments that countries have made on what they hope to do to reduce emissions. India actually is doing very well and may actually exceed the targets that it has committed to, because alternate sources of energy are moving so well. The price of energy has solar particularly has fallen so much that we will not need to use that much coal. The United States itself actually is doing very well and has always done very well on carbon related issues. And many of the states in the United States, mayors of cities, so
yes,
California, Pittsburgh, New York, etc., are all saying that they intend to fulfill those commitments. So I would say, what's the point of taking up an issue which actually is not going to make a big difference in the reality?
All right, so in your view, what are the issues that should be taken up? Because one would imagine on issues like Pakistan and terrorism emanating from Pakistan, there would be convergence between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump.
There can be convergence, but eventually every country makes those strategies which fulfill their interests. So in Afghanistan, India and the United States don't necessarily have convergent interests. We would not like to see a Taliban government in place again. Pakistan has been trying for years to bring back the Taliban. The United States is willing to negotiate with the Taliban. So we will still have differences, but this is a getting to know you meeting. It may not be worth being too specific. You can certainly say that, both countries are committed to fight terrorism, for instance, and how can we go further on that? Or, those kind of issues where there is a clear convergence and where we have very important interests involved. We don't have to get into the specifics of what exactly is Pakistan doing last month. The United States actually has just paid in an $800 million tranche to Pakistan for fighting terrorism, despite its own generals always speaking about how Pakistan is not sincere on that. So I would talk about terrorism, I wouldn't talk about the specifics of what Pakistan does. And in that sense, as democracies, given all the changes that are going on in the world, we could discuss, for instance, the Middle East, where there have been huge changes in the last few days. President Trump has just visited Riyadh. Prime Minister Modi has also just visited UAE, Dubai, he's been to Saudi Arabia and has built up and expanded our relationship with those countries. That would be something to discuss, even if the two don't agree on on those issues.
Okay, so it's a getting to know you visit, and we've seen great bonhomie between Prime Minister Modi and former President Barack Obama. Do you expect that to happen, keeping in mind that Trump's first few outings diplomatically as president didn't go too well with Australia and in other few instances? Do you think he'll sort of behave himself?
You know, that famous telephone call with the Australian Prime Minister, which he cut short, I have to say, you know, let's remember how brash the Australians can be also. So it wasn't only President Obama, it was a very poor choice of issue to bring up with President Obama on the very first with President Trump in the first exchange, you know, to bring up some 1,200 refugees whom President Obama had agreed to accept from one of those islands. Not a good issue when the whole campaign was carried on immigration issues by Trump. So bad choice. I think that these are similar personality types, both outgoing, both assertive, both speaking very definitively. Prime Minister Modi has so far shown that he can charm a lot of strong, powerful leaders. He has a good equation with the Russian president, with Putin. He did quite well with the Chinese president when he visited India.
Yes.
Though India-China relations are complex, he has a very good personal equation with Nawaz Sharif of Pakistan. He has a good equation with the Australian prime ministers, the Japanese.
Which is exactly my point. Prime Minister Modi's foreign policy is very personality driven and personal relationships driven. So perhaps it would be interesting to see how he takes that forward with Mr. Donald Trump.
I couldn't agree more. It will be a very interesting visit, and we will all be looking for signs of how the two personalities interacted with each other.
Absolutely. Oh, you wait for a lot of those comments on chemistry appearing on that day when those visuals come in. Thank you so much, Neelam Deo, for joining us on this conversation.
Thank you.
That's it for us for this time on BloombergQuint. But do remember, we will be tracking that meet throughout, so stay tuned.